Okay, we are moving forward to the priority area 2 under principles of climate adaptation. So here we look at adapting land use plans and protecting critical public assets and services. You probably noticed the background has changed. When I face this way, I'm looking at a nice lake, but the complaint from some viewers was that there was light in my glasses, so I'm now looking at the wall and the light is reduced. Quality matters, I guess. Okay, so lead ministry for this priority area is economy, planning, investment, or infrastructure. So again, depends on who's organizing in what way when it comes to land use, because land use includes various things: mining, infrastructure, agriculture, water resources, hydro dams, etc. Certain adaptation actions cannot be implemented by private actors and will require direct public action, which is kind of the focus here on adapting land use plans. These include protecting or adapting assets that are owned by the government or other public entities, those that are privately owned but designed, built, and operated following strict public regulations and guidance that leave little room and few incentives for private actors to act, and those that are considered to be government responsibility. Typically, grid infrastructure, energy infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. may fall in this. The latter typically include assets within the health, education, security, safety sectors. Public action is also important for including climate change in land use or coastal management plans. Coastal management is, now bigger and bigger part of building resilience, reducing risks and vulnerability. So this constrains and drives private investments in infrastructure and buildings and can serve as coordination mechanism for private actors. Taking action, looking at some screening questions. Identify actions to strengthen the resilience of public infrastructure and critical services. So we'll see some examples here. While actions of individuals can go a long way in adapting to a changing climate, they are not enough. People's resilience to climate change depends on the resilience of their cities and of the critical infrastructure systems and public services they rely on. This could be bridges, roads, healthcare, water systems, wastewater treatments, things like this, schools. Have governments taken adequate measures to ensure that spatial and urban planning is risk-informed and climate-smart? Not yet. Are there measures sufficient to ensure that lifeline infrastructure systems and essential public services are equipped to handle the impacts of climate change? The following questions can help decision makers identify shortcomings and guide them towards the actions needed to strengthen the resilience of public infrastructure and critical services. Okay, what are the actions? Let's start with 2.1, priority area 2, action 1. So action 2.1, public services and infrastructure. Does the government have a geo-referenced inventory of government assets? Should include hospitals, schools, fire and police stations, infrastructure assets such as roads, bridges, and electricity generation, etc. Did the government identify critical services and assets that need to be protected or strengthened in priority, especially once the risks that are increasing with climate change in the particular place are either informed to the government or identified by their own scientists? This could include criticality analysis of transport or energy systems, stress testing of hospital systems, and so on. There is some nice work done now on so-called resilience testing, where you perturb the systems like transport or energy and see how the perturbation propagates through the system and how the system recovers after the perturbation is gone. It could be a cyclone, or it could be a terrorist attack, it could be a big accident on a train line, etc. Okay, have the authorities assessed and addressed the risks to public services and infrastructure assets? These could include risk assessments of critical infrastructure and public services, risk-informed asset maintenance. So risk information, again remembering risk is combination of hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and now response is added to that as well. So these are, once the risk profile is known, risk map is made, the asset maintenance has to include risk information. Moving to action 2.2 under the priority area 2, adapting land use plans and protecting critical assets and services. Strengthening new assets and infrastructure. Does the government have standards and norms that account for criticality of assets and exposure to natural hazards? Are they adjusted regularly to respond to climate change? So the risk maps have to be evolving in time. Vulnerabilities have to be evolving in time because the hazard may change. You may go from drier region to very warm and wet or humid region, or you may go from heavy rainfall to drier regions, etc., etc. Should include hospitals, schools, fire and police stations, infrastructure assets such as roads, bridges, electricity generation, and so on. So that's quick. Action 2.3, risk-informed land use and urban planning. Is risk-informed land use and urban planning legally required and consistently enforced? In many places, especially countries which are not very high on restricting corruption in the system, may have all sorts of regulations on the book. But if they are not enforced, if people can get away by not following the rules, regulations, then obviously risk-informed land use and urban planning can fail to protect people and assets, services. These include long-term plans supported by laws, enforcement mechanisms, and strategic retreat options. What are the retreat options? It could be moving away from landslide-prone areas, flood zones, or even coasts. How easy is it? Not at all. Moving people or expecting people to move based on risk information, something called rational ignorance happens. People know it's a risk, but they play day by day because it's not easy to get up and move either. So there we are. Are nature-based solutions and ecosystem services an integral part of a country's risk reduction strategy? These include systematically conducted environmental risk assessments, restoration and preservation of protective ecosystems. Essentially what we are talking about is things like mangroves, which can act as dampers against cyclones, sea level rise. They act as filters for nutrients. They provide habitats for many more species, etc. There are many on land as well, mixing trees with agriculture, managing wetlands, peatlands, and so on and so forth. Those are nature-based solutions. I have several podcasts on nature-based solutions elsewhere that you can look up. Are areas that are impossible or too costly to protect in the long term identified and known by the public? Is risk information available to buyers of land or buildings? Are people allowed to go and settle in dangerous zones? Long-term maps with areas that are expected to benefit from protection investments published. So government has to say this is the area with these sorts of risk, but protection has been provided so you can invest in this area, whether it's housing or enterprises, businesses, etc. Okay. Action 2.1, identify critical public services and assets. Here lead ministry is economy, planning, investment and infrastructure. We'll look at the toolbox in a minute, and in terms of taking action, sample targets and indicators include critical infrastructure and services are identified, inventory of public assets, infrastructure are prepared, including hospital, school, university, buildings, their condition, exposure to hazards, and maintenance history, so that unknown deficiencies in the structures don't exist that will make the building collapse, for example, with one heavy rain event or so. Gaps in infrastructure and public assets identified, investment in plans to increase the resilience of public services and infrastructure systems completed. So what are the tools in the toolbox C? Using criticality analysis to identify key infrastructure vulnerabilities and gaps in services and networks. We're talking about climate change adaptation, but these also could include confounding or compound events. Earthquake happens, heavy floods come, or drought happens, food security issues come in, and so on and so forth. Criticality analysis is an important tool for identifying the most important infrastructure assets and their vulnerability, and to prioritize those interventions that will give the largest benefits. As part of its climate vulnerability assessment, the government of Fiji, for example, applied this approach to the transport system, an island that has a transport system that is worried about sea level rise, for example. The sector contributes approximately 12% to Fiji's GDP and receives around 30% of the government's annual capital budget. It is therefore not realistic to expect a large increase in spending in this sector. It's more important to improve the efficiency of the spending itself. Using an asset database coupled with modeling tools developed by the World Bank, a criticality analysis of Fiji's road network aimed to identify the transport assets that were most likely to result in high economic losses if damaged. For each component of the road network, the analysis estimated the number of trips that would become impossible in case of failure of or damage to the asset, and assessed additional travel distances and extra costs to the road user for trips that would remain possible. The components that would cause the largest impacts on the whole network, if damaged, are considered critical. So resilience is in that sense important. How quickly it will recover, or will it become a long time downtime. A similar study was performed for the Tanzanian road network and its vulnerability to floods. The study evaluated the consequences in different supply chains of disrupting each road infrastructure asset for various durations. The main conclusion was that the most critical transport infrastructure assets differ across supply chains. We'll see in the figure C.1 that the possible effect of a one-week road disruption on household consumption and exports. Comparison of the map reveals that investment priorities depend on policy objectives. For example, segments of the coastal trunk road of south of Dar es Salaam are critical for maintaining household consumption and food security, but less relevant for manufacturing and trade. So policy has to decide priorities and focus. For latter, improving the road east of Morogoro is a priority. This segment carries large freight flows between Dar es Salaam port and landlocked countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. So vulnerability of Tanzanian road network then also affects other countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. So here is the criticality of a road that depends on how it is used. Impacts of road on disruption on households consumption. We looked at this when we looked at the executive summary of the book. So here we are with household loss of daily consumption depending on which particular road is affected and the network that cascades that perturbation. And this is impacts of road disruption on international clients here, Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia. So here is Zambia, and here you are heading towards Rwanda, Burundi. Democratic Republic of Congo is here. So they are not the same roads. This one is going down here and then up into Zambia and Democratic Republic of Congo from the Dar es Salaam port, right? So importer loss percentage of daily consumption here much higher. This is 0.7 to 0.1. This is 3 to 0.5. So obviously country has to decide whether it's getting enough income from these countries to worry more about this or worry about this network which affects its own people and their food security more. Okay, so let me come back and do this, continue this in the next podcast. But we are in the second section after foundations. First one was helping adapt people and firms. The second one is now protecting, so adapting the land use plans and protecting critical public services and structures. Okay. By the way, I'm just adding a little piece here because I made a mistake. PPP in this case is not purchasing power parity, which is the economics thing. Here it means public-private partnership. So if you heard me say something else, then just remember in this book, in this context of adaptation, PPP is public-private partnership. Okay, sorry about that.